Hello, welcome again to Sport Unlocked. Joining me, Rob Harris from Sky News as ever, Martyn Ziegler from The Times, and Tariq Panja from The New York Times. We did try asking another guest to come on.
And nobody knew who Harris was. Like, call Harris. Who's Harris?
Well, probably busy.
Yeah, it was a pity that we didn't have Harris-Trump showdown on this podcast.
Well, he actually wasn't too busy to go on podcast this week, right before being re-elected, of course, President of the United States.
Joe Rogan's podcast, and this is now one of the most popular podcasters in the world, but he shot to fame as a sports commentator on UFC.
Donald Trump did ensure sport featured pretty heavily during his speech while declaring victory in Florida. Joining him on stage was the USC chief, Dana White, and also the LIV golfer, Bryson DeChambeau.
Something, we have up here today the US Open champion. He's a fantastic golfer, slightly longer than me. It's a little bit longer than me. And we also have a man, Dana White.
You do see the Ultimate Fighting Championship boss alongside Donald Trump pretty often. He was there at the Republican National Convention for a third time. He's been with Trump at rallies, such as the one at Madison Square Garden ahead of Election Day. And the journalist Karim Zidan has pointed out that UFC has been used as a platform by Donald Trump to rehabilitate his image after the attempted January the 6th insurrection, and going as far as to say that UFC fans are a key political base, and no other sports organization has perhaps dedicated as much time or resource to Trump's re-election as UFC. Who would have thought mixed martial arts would determine perhaps a US presidential election? Well, Joe Rogan, as you mentioned, Tariq, also credited with helping Donald Trump. And there's another podcast too that Trump was on just before Election Day. He seems to enjoy his pods, Donald Trump. Maybe he's a Sport Unlocked fan, because he certainly covers quite a bit of the same territory, because he was on the Let's Go podcast, which includes Bill Belichick, the legendary NFL coach. And, well, he got into a lot of subjects on it, subjects we're going to get into, with the implications of the US presidential election on the world of sport.
The World Cup and the Olympics, I was responsible for getting both of them, actually. And I was very honored to do so. And I'm sure they'll work out really good. Getting the World Cup was a big deal. I thought it was an achievement, actually.
Of course, it was during Trump's first term that the Olympics was awarded to LA for 2028 and the Men's World Cup to the United States alongside Canada and Mexico for 2026. And we never imagined that he would be president back again to be overseeing these two events and the Club World Cup as well. So 3 big tournaments.
It's actually quite rare where a bidding city or country has the same president when the tournament is actually on. It's hard to think back, maybe some dictatorship in Mexico or Argentina back in the day. But if you look at modern tournaments, you've not had the same person who's been in charge at the time the tournament actually kicks off.
There's a bit of an irony to all this, because when LA were bidding, I think they were bidding initially for the 2024 Olympics, and then the US, the United bid for 2026 World Cup. Both sort of bid teams were asked about the issue of Trump's anti-Muslim rhetoric, and he referred to shithole nations, countries from the Caribbean and Africa, and the fact that this could put off voters, and the sort of message they get. I mean, the US United bid team came to London just before the bid, a few months before the bid, and the message was, look, Trump's not going to be president. Even if he wins a second term, he's not going to be president in 2026. And that was the same. In fact, in 2016, I interviewed Casey Wasserman, who is the LA chief exec, and he said, if Donald Trump is president, then we're fair game. I certainly hope that doesn't happen, and I don't think it's the right thing for our country. And I'm very open and clear about it.
I wonder if he's going to be one of those who are going to backpedal now in the days and weeks ahead. By the way, I was wrong earlier. Vladimir Putin is the most recent guy who was leader during a bidding nation and when it hosted the World Cup with Russia in 2018. So, there's going to be some talk about Putin and Trump in the days to come too, no doubt.
And as we speak, Vladimir Putin's currently in Sochi holding some notable meetings there. Interesting you mentioned that 2026 World Cup vote, because a lot of people were saying that Donald Trump's comments about immigration would harm the bid. But what was overlooked was there was a different political dispute which seemed to actually favour the Americans and go against Morocco, which was Morocco's claim on the Western Sahara, which managed to lose them some votes in Africa.
Yeah, I remember that. That was in June in Moscow, actually, before the World Cup, when that North American bid secured victory. And to be honest, you know, Mexico, Canada, and North America, the first, and United States, the first 48-team World Cup up against Morocco, you feel like it was never going to lose. And also, these people were promised billions in revenue. And this is, as we know, that room cares about money, these 211 FIFA nations, whatever the politics is, and sometimes it is quite sharp. But the amount of money that they're offered, the US won with a sizable majority. And it reminded me, I was in New York just before the election this time around, and I got a taxi, and the driver was from Abbottabad in Pakistan. Now, that you might remember is where Osama bin Laden was found by the US under Obama, funnily enough. And I asked the driver who he was going to vote for, and he didn't even blink. He didn't have, not a second. This guy from Pakistan was going to vote for Donald Trump, and so were all of his family members, because he said he'd like to be richer under Donald Trump. And that was all this guy cared for. And I think some of that is shared around looking at the analysis now.
Did any sort of sports international leader sort of congratulate Trump before his victory had been confirmed, do you think?
Well, very quick to Instagram was Gianni Infantino. In fairness, Donald Trump himself claimed victory before the projections had actually put him over the 270 Electoral College line to secure his return to the White House. But there, Gianni Infantino posting pictures of him, including at the White House over the years, in the Oval Office with a Trump 26 shirt. Congratulations, Mr. President. We will have a great FIFA World Cup and a great FIFA Club World Cup in the United States of America. Football unites the world. And I see it's been liked by John Terry.
Yeah, and to be fair to Gianni Infantino, that first Trump term, it was like a revolving door for him for access to the US president. And that door has been firmly shut for the last 4 years. But President Biden had no interest in seeing him, and neither did most of his government. And now he's clearly looking for his friend again. He's back in.
Maybe in part it's because of how he spoke around Donald Trump in the Oval Office, including this where, well, he said he's part of FIFA.
So you're part of the FIFA team now, huh? That's good. That's good.
Then there was Davos in January 2020 when Infantino introduced Trump at a dinner with global CEOs, and Infantino was hailing Trump as a fighter. But at the exact same time, that's when the Senate impeachment trial was beginning, the first one into Donald Trump.
I am lucky enough in my life to come across some of the most talented athletes in soccer. And President Trump is made of the same sort of fiber. He's a competitor. He wants to compete. He wants to win. He wants to show who is the best. He says actually what many think, but more importantly, he does than what he says.
Well, Gianni Infantino thinks he knows which side of his bread is buttered, and he's probably got it right, hasn't he? Incredible foresight to get this for his two major tournaments. And, you know, this is Donald Trump. He probably coined the phrase beautiful game. It's the greatest game ever. It's a beautiful game.
Well, Trump's son Barron is certainly a soccer fan. In fact, he supports Arsenal. And during his first term, Trump was asked on CBS about whether he would want Barron to play American football. And this is how he responded, addressing safety concerns in the NFL.
A tough question. It's a very good question. If he wanted to, yes. Would I steer him that way? No, I wouldn't.
Why?
I wouldn't. And he actually plays a lot of soccer. He's liking soccer. A lot of people, including me, thought soccer would probably never make it in this country, but it really is moving forward rapidly. I just don't like the reports that I see coming out having to do with football. I mean, it's a dangerous sport. And I think it's really tough. I thought the equipment would get better, and it has. The helmets have gotten far better, but it hasn't solved the problem. So, I hate to say it because I love to watch football. I think the NFL is a great product, but I really think that as far as I've heard NFL players saying they wouldn't let their sons play football.
Of course, head injuries and all the rest of it. But don't forget, guys, they're also going to be neighbors, aren't they? The White House, yes, is in Washington, but the Winter White House, Mar-a-Lago, is in Florida, not far from FIFA's headquarters now in Coral Gables and where Gianni Infantino now lives. So the two could be spending quite a lot of time together in the next 4 years.
It does raise some challenging questions. Of course, there's no reason why Gianni Infantino should be held to a higher standard than politicians, including, say, in Britain, Keir Starmer, members of the Labour government, who were really critical of Trump in the past, have now congratulated him and said they want to work with him. But obviously, we do hear quite a bit from Infantino talking about his 4 daughters. How does that align with Trump's legal challenges he's had over the years?
Those legal challenges, also the issue of women's rights over their own bodies and the abortion bans and a lot of these issues that were brought to the fore. But also, you mentioned world leaders and Keir Starmer, but I didn't see the type of Instagram peacocking from Keir Starmer as we saw on Gianni Infantino's feed, for example, all of those pictures that you mentioned earlier.
Victor Orban, maybe his message was closer to that.
Perhaps. There you go.
I mean, Chuck Blazer, the former Secretary General of CONCACAF and longtime FIFA member, disgraced whistleblower, etc., he actually was friends with Donald Trump, and he told me once Trump was actually a great soccer fan. In fact, I think he actually hired 2 apartments in Trump Towers, didn't he, Chuck Blazer? So I think he knew him pretty well.
There's a very good story there, actually. So Trump needed a location for an advert for his Trump University. And if you think about legal action, there was some related to that as well, if you want to Google that. So Chuck Blazer loaned one of his apartments to Donald Trump for an ad for this controversial university. They had to roll in some, I think, fake bookshelves with fake books on them in order for it to have the correct look. There are links with football and Donald Trump that stretch back quite a long way.
But as for the 2026 World Cup itself, what difference will it make having Trump in the Oval Office? What are the challenges in terms of the logistics, the organisation, the event that still need to go ahead? I mean, it is quite unprecedented, an event for the United States with potentially hundreds of thousands of football fans descending on the country over the space of a few weeks. Obviously, issues of visas.
Yeah, the biggest challenge for the federal government is visas and security. It doesn't really have any input into. There's no sort of federal capital money going into infrastructure, for example. So it's all about the access for fans and the security. So I'm sure it would, FIFA will be hoping that, they'll be able to persuade Trump to say that having a ticket for a World Cup match perhaps will be enough to secure entry to the.
Yeah. But the other thing with Trump, which is different to the Biden administration, is this is a man who wants to and has pretty much can shape this government now to do pretty much whatever he likes. So if Gianni Infantino and Donald Trump strike up this good relationship and Trump wants the World Cup to be hugely successful, he will just push all of the known kind of ways of doing business in Washington, sweep them aside and find a way of getting things done. Now, if you're FIFA, that's probably, I guess, a better partner. What did Jerome Valcke say back in the day when he was in Brazil? Guys, what was his phrase?
Easier to organise a World Cup than a dictatorship.
Right. Now, people have described Trump in a way during campaigning. I think he might have used that term himself about what he plans to do if he's elected. So I guess we're going to see.
Yeah, he will have to overcome that issue of being so heavily against migration and lots of free passage to the country for football fans as well. But I think the country doesn't really know what's hit it yet. Certainly the politicians who might think the NFL is big, but to experience a World Cup that will dominate for an entire month with the world's eyes watching, even if in some parts of America it might feel it's not going on, it is something that the country really, I don't think, has comprehended yet. And we are, less than 2 years away from it.
Yeah, it's hard to see. But it's not only the World Cup and the Olympics. There's other more urgent issues as well. Rob, I think you might have mentioned one earlier with the golf at the start of the pod. What is that? What are they saying about that?
Well, of course, Donald Trump does benefit from the existence of the Saudi-backed LIV Golf, because this year again, when the LIV Tour descended on the US, it was held at his Doral course in Miami. Donald Trump himself did turn up while on the presidential campaign trail, and he was chatting to various players. I mentioned, of course, DeChambeau was on stage. And this week, in the final stages of trying to secure his return to the Oval Office, going on that podcast with Bill Belichick, he wasn't talking about policy issues in terms of infrastructure or healthcare or foreign policy. He was getting into the LIV Golf dispute with the PGA Tour and whether or not he could solve it. This is what you had to say.
It's really top players on LIV, and it would be nice if they could all play together. And it's terrible when somebody's shut out of a major. It's terrible. But, they're very happy with Saudis. They're over there, and they're happy with their decisions. Now, they made more money than they probably could ever have made. They got checks from, in some cases, hundreds of millions of dollars. So it's hard to say, gee, I'm going to be happy because I can't play. But I think it'll come together. Yeah, I could certainly help it. I could probably get it done. I would say it would take me the better part of 15 minutes to get that deal.
So he thinks he could solve it pretty quickly. And then we heard from Rory McIlroy after Trump won the election, well, sort of welcoming Trump's return, believing he could strike a peace deal along with Elon Musk as well, of course, the ex-boss.
Yeah, I saw those quotes. And to be honest, I think he might have a point here in Donald Trump's relationship with Saudi Arabia, the Public Investment Fund, Mohammed bin Salman, and LIV Golf. They have the most powerful man in the world, in the United States, there, who wants this thing to go ahead. Now, if they can push this through, the DOJ was looking at it. Now, there is talk about how the Justice Department will now be the senior leaders will be replaced with people who are allied to Donald Trump. What does that look like? What do cases like this, the LIV Golf and PGA merger, look like? They probably look a lot smoother now for those supporting that type of thing with Donald Trump in the office.
And one of Donald Trump's first congratulatory calls was with Mohammed bin Salman, the Saudi crown prince, within hours of securing his victory. And you mentioned the US Justice Department investigation. That's over whether or not the PGA Tour merger with LIV Golf would violate the antitrust laws. Of course, this merger coming after the quite contentious launch of LIV 2 years ago now, when players were threatened with fines and being banned from events going forward. It was, in 2023, in May, we then had news of the merger. We thought it'd be wrapped up fairly quickly, even by the end of last year. But here we are, almost a year and a half down the line, and obviously it's not managed to come to fruition as a deal with this sort of threat from the DOJ hanging over it.
No, and his first overseas trip, actually, in the first term was to Saudi Arabia. And don't forget his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, who's been involved in a lot of these sports issues like the World Cup and other things. He set up a private equity fund with Stephen Mnuchin, former financial secretary of some kind. It slips my mind now. And most of their funds were raised in the Middle East, with Saudi Arabia being the biggest funders to Jared Kushner's investment fund. So all roads lead to Saudi Arabia, and that lane between the White House and Saudi will be a smooth one to travel across, I guess.
And don't forget also, Trump, he predicted this sort of merger between the US PGA and LIV Golf back in, I think, June 2022. Then it happened about a year later. And then, with this Department of Justice thing, you can just see that being swept away, all going through now.
You mentioned his close relations with Saudi. Of course, his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, went to Qatar during the World Cup in 2022, which does raise, going back to football, the issue of whether Donald Trump will be handing over the World Cup in 2026 alongside Gianni Infantino, the final in New York, New Jersey.
I'm sure he won't miss that opportunity. What do you think, Ziggs?
I'll be guaranteed they will be there together.
Will there be his own version of the bisht that was handed over to Messi?
I was thinking this. Well, I think a Trump set of cufflinks and Trump tie might be the order of the day there.
Yeah, a MAGA hat might be going too far.
Surely the winning captain has to don a MAGA hat.
Well, of course, it could get an early chance at the Club World Cup in 2025. But it'll be interesting to see how Trump finds teams deciding to take a stand on social issues, because during his first term, it was when the Black Lives Matter movement was taking off and players were starting to take a knee. And Trump did retweet a post by the Florida Republican Matt Gaetz, who wrote, "I'd rather the US not have a soccer team than have a soccer team that won't stand for the national anthem." I did ask FIFA at the time, and it came as close as you could get to a rebuke of Trump, because they put out a statement to me saying that they appealed for tolerance, mutual respect, and common sense.
Yeah, but if he calls this out, seeing the election result and the issue of the culture wars, a lot of his base would probably be very supportive of Donald Trump calling out football players taking the knee. Don't forget, he's won the popular vote as well in this election, the first Republican president to do so since Bush in 2004. So, he's coming in with quite a strong mandate. And if the culture wars aspect is one of those, I'm sure there'll be millions of Americans who pretty much back him in his stance on these social issues.
Because also this week he did touch on the issue of transgender women taking part in women's sport. Again, that was on his mind right in those final hours of campaigning for the election. And he's certainly made a stand about how trans women should not be taking part in women's sport competitions. Another thing with the Olympics coming up as well.
Yeah, because the IOC still haven't sorted out their rules on that, have they? So that'll be an interesting one to watch.
And you can imagine he's going to have a lot of opinions on all these matters. He does like to weigh into these social issues, as we see so many of them across sport.
Yeah, but do you think it's like he's going to do his thing? The question is going to be a lot harder for those governing bodies to deal with what he says. Obviously, I think his supporters will like all of this stuff, but for FIFA, as Rob mentioned earlier, asking for a reply then, and for the IOC to then try and, defend the social values that sport has embraced in recent times. That's going to be the hard part on the part of, say, Gianni Infantino, whoever is the IOC president.
And as it stands, Trump would be the person officially declaring the LA Games open in 2028. Although the games will be taking place in a Democratic stronghold of California. So it'd be interesting to see the reception that he does get. We've seen in the past Olympics when politicians have been booed when they've been introduced to the crowd. So perhaps not the most welcoming of environments for Trump in Los Angeles. Although events are being held in other parts of the US, so maybe he would benefit from that.
Probably the last place, honestly, the last place Donald Trump will want to be centre stage is in California at a big stadium in Los Angeles. So I think booing is guaranteed there.
Yeah, and standing next to potentially the LA's Democrat Mayor Karen Bass, who said in 2020 she believes Trump is racist and gives license to racists.
Well, at least he's got a thick skin and he won't react to comments like that.
Yeah, just remembering how Megan Rapinoe said she wouldn't go to the White House after they won the Women's World Cup in 2019. And there was a whole Twitter thread sequence from Trump at the time, having an absolute go at Rapinoe for disrespecting the country and the flag. Of course, Rapinoe has now retired from US women's national team duty. But we mentioned quite a few times the Club World Cup, which is looming next year. And maybe Trump could get up to speed by listening to us on this pod, because, we are less than a year away from it. And we have finally had the regulations for it this week. Something interesting was FIFA's demand that clubs have to put out the strongest possible sides. Unclear how this will be implemented, because as I was reminded, think back to the 2018 World Cup, and England and Belgium had nothing to play for in a final group game in Russia, and the weakened sides put out then. There was no consequence from FIFA.
No, this is standard for all the tournaments. Basically, it's trying to say, if you have a dead rubber in a group match, then you can't. You shouldn't field a weakened side because it's unfair on the other teams. So, but nothing ever happens. So I don't think it means anything particular for the Club World Cup.
No, but the other thing that's interesting, what's happening at the same time is the CONCACAF Gold Cup, which is a national team competition there. And FIFA's rules state that national teams have precedent, or you have to release your players for national team football. So obviously, with Mexico and the United States being in the Gold Cup as well, for example, there is that risk. But we've seen historically, apparently, not a tournament, I must say, I've covered that closely or followed that closely, that there have been players given the tournament off. Those who play in Europe, for example, sometimes are given waivers for that tournament.
Completely overlooked, of course, the fact Trump has that next year. So imagine if Mauricio Pochettino's US men's national team do reach a final, win a cup, something for Trump to celebrate there as well.
Yeah, and will he be demanding Pochettino sings the national anthem, which we've mentioned before? But anyway, I think the Club World Cup has finally, I think, taken its first step towards commercial. Well, I wouldn't say success yet, but at least they've got a sponsor on board, haven't they?
They do. Hisense, the Chinese company, have finally signed up as a sponsor of the Club World Cup, the only one so far. But also news emerging of perhaps why FIFA have been challenged in terms of bringing new sponsors on board, because this report first in The Guardian that Coke and Adidas are in dispute because they believe that their existing sponsorships do cover the Club World Cup. And this is something I'd heard being talked about because FIFA did originally announce this newly expanded 32-team Club World Cup as being called Mundial de Club FIFA, using the Spanish name. And one of the reasons apparently for that, I was told, was to create an attempted separation from the existing annual Club World Cup that's being replaced by this new quadrennial event, so they could bring their own sponsors on board. But then within the last few months anyway, FIFA have gone back to the English name of just Club World Cup. So this probably just, you could see the forces why existing FIFA sponsors who sign up for all the tournaments believe that they have the rights to this tournament without a new deal.
Yeah, and this will be all the devil be in the detail in the drafting. And this issue has been doing the rounds for since Gianni Infantino announced this Club World Cup, to be honest. Coca-Cola and Adidas have very, very long contracts. And in them, they are FIFA partners, not tournament partners. And they expect that relationship must cut across every event FIFA does. But FIFA want to sweat more money out from these sponsors for this particular event. Obviously, we talked about them needing several $1 billion to make it work, not least to pay the football team. There's one thing on Hisense. They were a Euro 2024 sponsor, and they had a great ad. And it wasn't a great ad, really, but it was just the logo and the slogan that went with it. I just never forget. It said, "We're the second best in the world," or something. You never hear a company say that it's number 2. That's right, number 2 in the world. And I just thought, what a lame, so lame that it's so good. It's really stuck with me. I wonder if they got to number 1 status by the time the Club World Cup comes round.
It makes it memorable. Who are number 1 then?
I was thinking about this, and my guess is Samsung, the Korean company that is an IOC partner.
Well, perhaps Trump will take a leaf out of their book and declare himself only the second best leader behind.
Well, they are going to be sponsored by the VAR.
Behind Vladimir.
They are going to be putting their branding all over the VAR. So that's just the latest challenge, though, for FIFA on this Club World Cup and for Gianni Infantino. We talked in the last pod about the ongoing questions about how Inter Miami earned their place, and it was a point made by Martyn in the Times about the financial benefits of qualifying as well. So it wasn't just handing them the prestige of going to the Club World Cup, but they're getting a significant financial uplift from being awarded this place. Again, as we've said previously, we didn't know in advance of the regular season ending that the Supporters' Shield in MLS would be the ticket to the Club World Cup. Everyone knows that the actual US National League champions is the team that wins the MLS Cup, which is the end of the playoffs process after the regular season. Not the usual league season that you might be familiar with in, say, La Liga or the Premier League. But, still ongoing questions. But also, as we get more details on the finances that teams could be banking.
Yeah, that's the point here. And that's why Gianni Infantino needs Messi and needs to raise all of this money. The TV deals they hope to complete in November. But Messi and this MLS Cup, whether he wins it or not, will be decided in December. So better tell the broadcasters now ahead of that decision for the TV rights, Rob. And in terms of distribution, that the millions the teams participating in the tournament get, we still don't know that. But all we know is to get Real Madrid there, to get European teams there. I was going to say Porto and Inter Milan and the others. It's not going to be cheap, is it? They're going to expect a big payout, as are other teams.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen various things reported, like 40 million euros guaranteed to the European teams. Then becomes quite difficult, though, doesn't it? Is how do you decide how much do you give to a European team? Because if you give the same amount to an African team, say like Mamelodi Sundowns, that could be a massive, advantage for them and completely skew the domestic tournaments in those countries. So that's a big challenge.
Still so many questions about the tournament. Regular updates here on the future of the Club World Cup, which of course will be starting in Florida, just down the road from Mar-a-Lago. So pretty handy for Donald Trump to drop into the opening match of that new FIFA tournament.
All the stars are aligning there, guys.
Some other talking points around, not in the United States, Manchester City, and the theme we return to quite regularly to update what is happening to the 115 charges case. Well, the hearings have been ongoing. We wait to discover just what the verdicts will be. Who's asked to be kept updated then?
Well, interestingly, so I did a Freedom of Information request to the Foreign Office to see what emails, communications there'd been from the Foreign Office, specifically around the 115 charges involving Manchester City. And actually came out that in September 2023, the Foreign Secretary at the time, James Cleverly, asked for an update on it. There was in May 2024, the British Embassy in Dubai asked for an update, and there have been a couple of other things. I mean, most of the detail is redacted, so we don't know, and it's been redacted on the grounds that it could affect the sort of trade and diplomatic relationships between the United Arab Emirates and the UK. So, but it does raise questions, I think. Why?
Of course, why? Because we have to say what we're talking about here. We're basically accusing the Vice President of the UAE of corrupting for a decade Britain's biggest soft power export, which is the Premier League. And you're basically shaming the ruling family of the UAE. Now, if you think about diplomacy and what the Foreign Office does and the embassy there in Dubai, it's going to be very, very, they're going to be anxious, those people, because it's going to be extremely bad for the reputation of Sheikh Mansour bin Zayed Al Nahyan, who owns Man City. He's a brother of the ruler and is the vice president in question. If Man City are found guilty, and even if they're not, there's 6 years of these headlines, 115 charges, you guys are cheats. That can't be easy to deal with on a diplomatic level, can it?
Yeah, another FOI request to the Treasury showed that 2 weeks before James Cleverly asked for an update, the Treasury's permanent secretary had a meeting with the chief financial officer of Mubadala, which is the sovereign wealth fund of Abu Dhabi. And the memo of the meeting references the fact that Mubadala manages a 267 billion portfolio of investments, and that Khaldoon Al Mubarak, who is chairman of Manchester City, is Mubadala's chief executive and managing director.
Isn't this just standard context gathering to inform those in meetings, to be updated with a significant investment from the Vice President of the United Emirates. It's not suggesting any interference, is it? Although there are heavy redactions, so of course it does leave things open.
Well, it does ask the question again, should states be owning English Premier League football teams? Because I don't think the embassy in the United States or elsewhere will be asking questions like this and being asked to be kept abreast if, say, the Chelsea situation is going ahead in case they upset Todd Bowley or Clear Lake Capital. This is the issue, isn't it? The pressure points that states can bring to bear on countries if they own football clubs.
Although they might have been discussing why Roman Abramovich wasn't sanctioned in the US.
Yeah, maybe, but this is a whole different level, right? Let's be honest. Same as the Newcastle and Saudi sale, that went straight through Downing Street. I can't think of another Premier League club takeover that needed that sort of attention. You know, the people have been saying states shouldn't own teams, and this type of even questioning maybe explains why they're asking those questions.
And the fallout from, well, the Manchester City wider cases, of course, we've had one initial verdict in already on those sponsorships, many from the United Arab Emirates firms, means that the Premier League are having to rewrite the rule book on what are known as associated party transactions, those deals done with companies with links to the ownership. And this flows from the verdict we received a few weeks ago that were found to be partly unlawful based on some of the access to the data on sponsorship values and various other issues. So Premier League meeting this month to hopefully approve the rules now.
So the Premier League have put out some proposed amendments to their rules, and specifically around fair market value. So one important thing that they've done is they've removed any requirement for a deal to be of fair market value according to normal market conditions. They've removed the words normal market conditions. So I think what that means is it will allow clubs to say that, but for special reasons, perhaps a sponsor is willing to pay more than the normal market price, but that is still fair market value. I think that's a significant change. And the other thing which we've mentioned before is removing the burden of proof on clubs to prove that these deals are of fair market value. So I think both of those proposed changes, if they go through, could be significant.
We've used loads of words here, but in simple terms, what does it mean? So I'm an Arab country. I sponsor a football team. I think it's worth $1 billion because the team keeps winning and everyone keeps saying my country's name. I don't know, I make up a country, the UAE. So is that worth $1 billion?
Yes. Well, if you say
you think it's worth $1 billion.
If you say it is, Tariq, you say it is, then who am I to doubt you? Normal market conditions no longer apply.
I think it's worth $1 billion.
And maybe only a certain sponsorship aligning with a certain club delivers the value expected from it, then the profile and the attention.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, you know, this has happened before, actually, guys. In UAE, not UAE, Qatar, the famous Qatar tourism contract that went through the UEFA FFP situation there. And UEFA's FFP panel were able to hire a company. I think they hired Octagon. PSG hired Nielsen. And Nielsen came up with this huge number. I think it was like 200 plus million euros a year, because they said every time PSG and Qatar were used in the same sentence, it's worth this huge amount of money to Qatar, even though there was never any advertising related to Qatar tourism. So no shirt sponsorship, not even anything around the stadium that could link any of this, not even a poster that had the team in it, but it was worth 200 million. Octagon, on the other hand, said, hang on a minute, that it's always going to be mentioned. It's not worth anything, less than $1 million. So what are normal market conditions here? Well, you've got rid of those words. Is it 1? Is it 200? Or is it $1 billion?
The other thing to say here is that Manchester City are still claiming that not the whole rules are null and void anyway. There's a big challenge for the Premier League actually to get these amendments approved, because if 7 clubs vote against it, then they won't go through. And there's quite a few clubs who are unhappy with the Premier League at the moment. Think of Nottingham Forest, Leicester City, Everton, they've all had their issues. And then you have the clubs like Newcastle United, Manchester City, Chelsea and Aston Villa, who I think would all vote against them anyway. So it's going to be a knife-edge vote, I think.
And City's still unhappy the fact their new bumper deal with Etihad was blocked, as well as a banking sponsor as well, because they would believe that they would now have that income coming into the club since last year.
Yeah, so we're waiting for the cost verdict still on that last arbitration process, and then possibly any damages related to that. So we'll see what those are. But those teams Ziegs mentioned, they might be upset with the Premier League, but is it a case of cutting off your nose to spite your face? What do they get from just say no? We don't want these rules just because we don't like you, Premier League. Long term, is it healthy? Is it good for those clubs you mentioned? They're all very different. And Everton now are about to be bought by Dan Friedkin, an American owner there. And I wonder what he would think of the rules, which brings me to the point I've always been making. Should the rules be set by the people who owned 20 clubs in the moment? Or you can't think of a long-term way of running a league that way.
Maybe we'll find out by what the British Embassy in Washington's discussing, if that deal's gone through them as well.
There you go. Any update, guys, speaking of which, on this football regulator, that £160,000 a year, 3-day-a-week job we talked about? We still don't know who that's going to be.
Just English men's football as well.
Indeed. It's actually 130,000, not 160,000. That is, I mean, I know it's a lot of money to a lot of people, but if you're hoping to attract like a barrister, a KC, or somebody from a sort of big city firm, that is pretty small peanuts. And
peanuts? You're saying £130,000 a year for a part-time job?
I think
no. I just said that's a lot of money to some people. If you think that I was reading that a lawyer for these like prestigious law firms in London, that newly qualified lawyers earning 75,000. I mean, Lord Panic, he's getting paid between £5,000 and £10,000 an hour. So this is like 130,000.
It's a high profile. It's a high profile role. There's going to be a lot of pressure, and in the context you've described, probably it might seem it'd be hard to attract people. But that high profile also, and the fact you have this power over football, I'm sure they're not going to be short of people writing in to want to do that job who have great CVs.
It's a bit like sometimes people take jobs at governing bodies like the FA, despite knowing they could earn more in the private sector. For the prestige of working for someone like the RFU, for rugby in England, or the FA in terms of football.
Well, yes, I mean, there is that. I mean, I think it will appeal to somebody like a former MP, somebody who might have lost their seat at the last election, for example, because, I mean, MPs, they get paid less than that. So that might be one avenue. But, I think generally people are looking at this. I know at least some candidates who had been touted as being amongst the favourites are probably not going to apply now.
They could earn a lot on the other 2 days, though, can't they, Ziegs? If you're saying Lord Panic earns 10 grand an hour, imagine that. You do your high-profile football job for 3 days, and then you're in a oil arbitration, coining it in on the Thursday and Friday. Best of both worlds.
Well, he's currently fighting for private schools to be able to avoid paying VAT on their school fees.
There you go.
Yeah.
Well, he's just maybe a former British member of Parliament who's lost their seat, might want the job. I don't know. What about a soccer fan from the United States who might be looking for a new role in January? Joe Biden was into his football, wasn't he?
Well, if he was, he never made that clear to Gianni Infantino.
He didn't, did he?
Well, that's the positive note to end on this week, because Gianni Infantino knows he's probably going to be pretty welcome now back in the Oval Office again with Donald Trump there. So I imagine quite a lot of celebrations at FIFA. And knowing that Donald Trump is a big podcast fan, here's a sports news podcast that will get him up to date on everything building up to the World Cup and Olympics in the United States. So you know where to find us on X at Sport Unlocked. It's favourite platform again, maybe now, with his close relationship with Elon Musk.
There you go.
Maybe he needs to be on Truth Social.
Yeah, whatever. But the invitation, as we say every week, is open to these guys. Mr. President or Mr. President in January.
Mr. President-elect.
That's it. You're more than welcome.
Actually, I think he can be called Mr. President because he's previously been the president. So, like, you can say President Clinton still, can't you? So he's the Mr. President and Mr. President-elect.
All of those. Not even time to get to mention how Clinton was part of the bid team that didn't manage to land the 2022 World Cup to the United States, but then Donald Trump was there to get the 2026 World Cup. Well, a lot of politics on this week's episode. Thank you as ever for listening. You can send us all your feedback at Sport Unlocked on all the social platforms. And if you hit subscribe, it'll land in your feeds automatically, particularly those at Mar-a-Lago. For now, thank you for listening. Goodbye.